I trust you have a packet. We're going to go back to using the packet here a little bit. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I know all this stuff we just covered was not part of the packet. Something I'll try to update next time around. But this part now, we're going to talk about how to start a local church. And I want to give you this, can we call it a thought experiment? Right? Even if you don't feel called full-time anything, even if you're a lady, here's the experiment. You have to start a church next week. For some wild reason, that is the demand that is now on your life. You have to go to a new area and start a brand new church. What do you do? And next week, you have to start it. So how do you do that? Now that's a challenge, right? If you give me 5 years, but I have to start it next week, where do I start? What would I do? So that's what I just want you to have that in mind as we approach these next few topics. So the first thing you'd want to do is choose the area. And I've written 3 question marks with it because that's a big thing to consider. Not every area needs another church. Every area needs a Bible-believing church. But not every area needs another one. I've had people bring it to my attention here in Potch. We have a lot of churches. This is true. I don't know the true number, but talking to one of the Duominis here in town, he said there's over 140. Now, obviously, Ikacheng gets blended into that number, and it's hard to know how many small little pop-up groups would actually classify as a church. But Hiri Duomini, he said that's how many have registered with some official thing in Potch, 140. It wasn't like that when I came 13 years ago. That was the first thing I looked into when I drove into Potch. I stayed here for about 2 or 3 weeks, looking around, just surveying the town, getting familiar with it. I went to some other places as well. This was my survey time. And I looked around, what options are there for churches, big, small, different denominations? Is there anything close to a Bible-believing church? And I'm not looking for anybody. I don't expect any church to match every little thing, all the gray areas. I don't expect that. But fundamentally, is there a church that is doing a biblical work here? And right away, one thing that struck me hard. And Brother Francois, you can ask him about this, because Francois and Rick, those two, they were the first 2 men I met in Potch that I now know. They had gotten saved. They had learned how to evangelize by watching Ray Comfort's stuff, The Way of the Master, which is very, very good stuff. And they had gone about trying to win souls like that. Neither of the churches they were in were supportive of it. Neither of their churches did that. So they were now partnering up, going about, trying to do it. They were reaching out to other churches, saying, can we please come into your church and show you and your members how to win souls? Okay, right away I know, if you got to go into other churches and teach them how to do it, that is a glaring problem. That is huge. Something is very wrong if there's no evangelistic outreach. We're at step 1 of the Great Commission, and that's not even happening. So you might have all the doctrinal and theological, T's crossed and I's dotted, but if you're not actually mobilizing, I'm sorry, there's something wrong. So that was a big indication for me that something is needed. And then I looked deeper in, and there was just nothing that resembled a Bible-believing church. And I know this is being recorded, and you can do your own research on this. I've looked into Duet. That was, of course, the big church in town at the time. Now we have other churches that have grown quite a bit. But that church actually started off, from what I've heard, I've met some of the founding members of that church. One guy lives right around the corner from me. I had a very good, long conversation with him. In the beginning, that church really did, I think I would have gone to it at the beginning. They evangelized discipleship. He told me what they believed, but then he also told me why he left it. And there I'm not trying to hang out dirty laundry here, but as the years have gone on, something's happened in there. And as it was, there just seemed to be a great need for a Bible-believing church in this town. So just do your homework before you go to an area. Is there a need? All right, now, as you pray about that and you look for whatever other options there might be, let's say God shows you, here's the town. You need to go here. Then, step one, start to evangelize. So how do you do that? Any way you can. Try every method you can possibly think of. Don't compromise. Don't be unethical. Don't be annoying or rude. Hand out tracts. Talk to people. Go play squash and talk to the guy you're playing with. Go play around the golf and talk to the guy that gives you the bucket of balls. Anything. Just talk to people. Hand out gospel tracts. Get something going and evangelize. Now, once you start winning some people to Christ, you're not ready to start a church yet. Right? You got to start a church next week. Most people, when they hear that, they go, okay, I'm going to go find a building. Right? Is that what you thought? When I said go start a church, all right, where are we going to meet? You don't even have any people yet. What do you mean, where are we going to meet? You got to get some people first. I mean, where 2 or 3 are gathered. Go find 2 or 3, and then we can think about a church. So go evangelize. Any means possible. The Lord will give you someone eventually. And then even if it's just one, begin to disciple. That's your next thing. Guys, this isn't hard. Starting a church, when I say it isn't hard, I mean, the thought process here is not difficult. You win them to Christ, and then you teach them to observe all things whatsoever was commanded. That's it. That's all you do. From there, a church is going to start. It will. And if you're not the pastor, you're going to end up in somebody else's church. But the difficulty there is that pastor that now adopts you, he better be on board with what you've been telling those disciples. So I know, guys, this works because years ago, when we started off in Malawi, we had a man named Elimon Zeki that started coming to church. And we discipled him. I was about 6 months into Malawi at the time. Discipled him. He was a school teacher at the time. He hadn't been paid in 6 months. So he said, Pastor, I'm sorry, I can't even finish. He was halfway through with advanced discipleship. He said, I can't even finish. I got to go back to the village. I can't survive here because we were in the capital city. He went back to his village of Dedza. And a few months later, I got a phone call from Elimon. I said, what's going on? How's it going? He said, Bwana, I didn't mean to, but I started a church. You did? At the time, I didn't expect that. I said, what do you mean you didn't mean to? He said, well, I did what you taught me to do. I started handing out tracts and I started witnessing to people. He would get on his bicycle and travel 45 minutes to get to the market because he lived way out in the bush. 45 minutes to the market. At the market, he would win people to Christ. And then, after he'd won them to Christ, he said, now that you're saved, you need to be discipled. So he said, I've been going back and following up on all my converts, and I've been teaching them what you taught me. So now I've discipled them. And now all of these people were coming to his house that Sunday, knocking at the door and saying, hey, we can't go back to our old churches. You've shown us where they're wrong. So you need to preach to us now. And Elimon said, I don't know how to preach. I've never been trained. God hasn't called me to be a pastor. And that's where I got the phone call. He said, hey, I started a church. and they're not leaving. They won't leave. They want me to preach. He said, what do I tell them? Just tell them something that you do know. He said, I've already told them everything I know. I said, tell them again. So he did. He started over, and he started to re-disciple them and go back through the material. I said, next Sunday, I'll be there. I'll preach to them. You just tell them. I'll be there. Sure enough, next Sunday, I preached in our church in the capital. I drove 2.5 hours out to the village, and I showed up, and there were about 12 people sitting on the dirt out in front of his mud hut. And they wouldn't leave. They'd been there since the morning. They'd sat there for 4 hours waiting for a preacher to show up. That church is still going today. That church is still going today. That church, they ended up with a man coming 2 hours it's 2 hours of a bicycle, 45 minutes of a motorbike to get from Mozambique to the Malawi church. Elimon had won a Mozambican to Christ. That guy came to church for, I think, about 2 years and said, can't we start a church closer to my village? So Elimon went across the border with that man, started to evangelize, won people to Christ, discipled there. You know what happened? church got started. And then that entire church, they got together. The whole church went out witnessing. The whole church. They would go around from church to church. They'd go into a Presbyterian church, into an Anglican church. They'd be very polite. They wouldn't interrupt the service. They'd say, "Pastor, do you mind if we give the gospel to your people?" And that pastor would say, "Sure, go ahead." And then they would win a bunch of souls there and win a bunch of souls there. And I just showed you the picture a few days ago of that church in Mozambique that built their own building out there in the village. And you know what that church did? Because they went to the next village and witnessed there, another church started. It's just this. They evangelized and then they discipled. And then once there is this unity of the faith, there's a group of people that believe the same thing, understand what they're believing, what they want to practice. Naturally, they begin to assemble. They realize we can't go back to those old churches. They were telling us lies. We're going to be here together. And then your own assembly starts. So this is naturally going to grow. The assemble part of this will naturally happen once discipleship has run its proper course. Usually by the time, as I mentioned earlier, you get to lesson 9, you're teaching them about the local church, the question is going to come up. Well, I mean, if we should go to church, if this is a biblical command, how are we going to do that? Just recently down there on the South Coast, we had a guy that used to be here with us. He moved down there for work, and he was sitting in a church in George. They didn't evangelize. There wasn't no real discipleship. I told him, I said, "Brother, if you start to evangelize, what's going to happen is you're going to win a soul to Christ, and that soul needs to be discipled. And if you disciple them, you're going to teach them this, but the church you're sitting in teaches that. So then that convert's going to say, well, but the pastor's wrong. And then that convert's going to come to you and say, why is the pastor wrong? And you're going to cause problems in that church." I said, "Now you're better off just sitting there staying quiet. Tell the pastor where you disagree, but don't you start splitting that church. Because that's just unethical. That's wrong." I said, "If you want to do this right, you start your own church." And that's why you get to these two things, this is going to happen eventually. So you don't need any flashy, fancy gimmicks. Just evangelize, disciple, and then the assembly part is going to happen naturally. Now, once you begin to assemble, all right, we're just going to move past all the intricacies of finding a building and so forth. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, different options for that. This is my recommendation. This might happen differently depending on your circumstance. But first thing you want to do is have a Sunday morning service. Just have a preaching service. That's the first thing. And keep it simple. Keep it short. But have a Sunday morning service. As time goes, and you'll know when the people are hungry for this, start a Sunday school class with it. Now, guys, there's no biblical verse that says you have to have Sunday school. I think it's a great opportunity to teach people more Bible and to have, a slightly different approach. Sunday service, you preach. And you could even be more evangelistic. It's just the way it kind of works. You get generally lost people might come to that service. But that Sunday school hour, that's your Bible study time. You can go a little deeper there. So start with a preaching service, add on a Sunday school. And then, again, no biblical command for this, but I would add on a Sunday evening service. I like the idea of having the church assembled on the Lord's Day. I like the idea of meeting frequently. And you should know now with our church and our schedule, we adjust that as the year goes, depending on, when school breaks happen and people are out of town. We try to be mindful, not to overrun the sheep, overrun the herd. We don't want to do that. But there's also a command to assemble, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So this is something you just need to be mindful of what the people need and try to provide that. And then eventually a midweek service come in as well. We've chosen Thursday. Many churches do Wednesday. That, again, no biblical command to do that, but I like the idea of getting together in the middle of the week. I think we need that kind of encouragement, but all of that can be determined as time goes. And then finally, church membership. Don't start membership at this stage. Day one, you've assembled. Okay, pass the paper. Everybody sign up. They don't even know what they're getting into yet. Let the church develop. Let it take some structure and form. Church membership is there to help organize things. It does provide some accountability on a can we call it an official level, like a recognized level? Because if somebody's just a regular attender and not committed to being a member, they may not recognize your authority as the pastor to say, listen, I'm sorry, but you're living like this, and we need to take steps. We don't allow that in this church. They say, listen, I'm not a part of you anyway. I was just coming as a visitor. So church membership becomes a very, we'll say, a necessary thing at a certain point. But you got to let the church grow some and kind of develop some structure. Then you can start a church membership and actually take down names and that kind of thing. By the time you get to that stage, give me a call. I'll be happy to share our church constitution with you and walk you through how you should keep that simple. Keep it as simple as you can, but then also you want to try to tailor make that to your congregation, right? What one church demands, for membership, some people make you jump through a lot of hoops. We try to minimize that as much as we can, but we do want you to know what you're getting into, right? We don't want you to just sign the paper and have no idea what we expect when you sign up. So church membership, like I said, that's the very last part of that. All right, now I want to give you some things that you should consider. Do I want to do that? Hang on a second. Yeah, forgive me. My notes, I did this kind of separately. As you know, I'm building this again as we go. Let's talk about meeting places first, and then we'll see if I can find it on my notepad here. All right, we'll just talk about this. Some meeting places. One good option is to meet in somebody's home. In Romans 16, you read about Aquila and Priscilla having a church in their home. 1 Corinthians 16 as well, it's mentioned. That's a perfectly fine place to start. There are some downsides to that. It can be obviously it's cramped. A home is generally not meant for worship services. You have to worry about noise and neighbors. You can't sing as loud as you might want to do. And there's not much room for growth. There's not much room for parking. So there's definitely some drawbacks to meeting in a home. But when you first start off, that's not a bad idea at all. And then renting a place, that's your next option. As the church grows, and forgive me, give me just a second here. Oh, there it is. Okay, found it. Oh, yeah. Okay, on meeting in a home, visitors, it's hard to get visitors to come to that. And I say that generally. Sometimes you find a visitor that likes the idea that it's in a home and not a building. They have some sort of hang up on that. But generally, you're handing out tract, come to our church. Where is it? It's in my basement. Either this is a pyramid scheme or this guy is like a serial killer. It's not nice. Yeah. There's been too many weirdos in the church, so people get a little hesitant about that. I call them cold call visitors. People that are looking for a church, just going through the internet, just church in this area, and they find out it's in some guy's house. Just for a lot of people, that's enough for them to go somewhere else. All right, now we'll talk about renting a place. Some different ideas I've given you here: conference rooms, school halls, or even another church building. All of these things come with drawbacks. All right. One good side to this is the general maintenance is not your concern. Praise the Lord. You just, if something breaks, call the guy and let him fix it. That's pretty nice. But there's a lot of downsides. The cost, I'm not a financial wizard at all, but renting stuff generally is not a good way to save or use money. You're just throwing money away when you rent it. Rather invest it into buying or building. But in any event, the cost is an issue. Scheduling issues, that can be very tricky because your schedule does not come first. If you're renting from a school, like when we were at Bailey Park Primary School, we had our Sunday service, but even then there was like once or twice we couldn't even have a Sunday service there. When we were at the Roots, we had to rent a tent on one Sunday because they just had functions. We rented a tent. Whoa, that was a massive undertaking. But you're at the mercy of these other venues. So you can't have special services like our anniversary service. Our missions conference didn't used to be what it is now. It used to be Saturday morning and then Sunday. And we'd have, a service or two. But now with our own place, we can have as many meetings as we like. Also, as you grow, you'll have to move constantly. It just depends on how big or small your church is. I mean, if your church splits, I've seen churches do this before. They're renting a hotel conference room, which works well. But if the conference room or the conference hall seats 500 people and you have 10 people, that is not a very fun service to have. It's very awkward, and then you need to find another place. So that'll fluctuate. You'll have to be bouncing around town. What happened to us is we started off in the horse riding club, went to a conference hall in the Roots. While we were there, they built the chapel that stands there now. So we moved into the chapel. We filled that up to capacity. Then we had no more room. Literally, not one more chair could go in there. And then we went to Bailey Park Primary School, which they were very kind. They were very good to us. They never raised the rent once. I think we were there 6 years or something like that. They never raised the rent once, which was tremendous. And that headmaster was very, very kind to us. But it's an older place. The chairs were not easy to work with. We had to set the sound equipment up Rainier, isn't that a blessing of a memory? Every week. Oh man, there were definitely setbacks to that. Where was I going with all this? I'm telling you this story. Why? Somebody remind me, where was my point? Garrett, what was I thinking? This is what I pay you for. Oh, do I have to pay extra for that? Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Premium subscription. Where was I going with that? Oh, yes. Thank you, Garrett. We decided once we got to the school, we did fill that room, not completely, but we were quite full. It was not a very good location for visitors to come to. We couldn't accommodate families with young kids. We didn't really have a nursery. There was a lot of drawbacks to that. It was far from the university. We lost a few students that just couldn't make the trip because of distance. But we decided the next time we move, we need to move into our own place. Because no matter where we go next, it is going to have to be a large enough room that the rent is going to be very expensive. And it's not going to make sense to be paying that much rent for this big place. Better to just put that towards the building. So we had decided this is our final move until we get what to now is our permanent property. So praise God for that. And then also, if you're renting a place, it does send a bit of a message to the general public that there's, I don't know a better way to say it, a lack of stability. They view it as a temporary thing. Now, everything within me, I'm here to stay. I have no intention of shutting the church down just because we don't have a building. But to the casual observer, he's looking at it going, this church isn't fully committed to this town. At any moment, they could pack up and leave. And a person who is, situated in this town, he may not want to commit himself to such a project. So that's something to consider. Now, the next option is to build or buy, one or the other. I think everybody probably knows where Shofar now is, that church nearby the hockey fields. What was that before? It wasn't a PPA. Does anybody know what that was before? It was some sort of reform church. Anyway, we went in there. We had a land developer in the church at the time. So he and I went to that place because they were selling it. And I thought, well, we need a place. And they wanted 16 million rands. I said, the building's like 400 years old. I don't think I can pay that much, but not really, but it was old. It needed some repairs. I said, I'll tell you what, we can offer, and then I made the offer. And the real estate agent literally laughed at me and said, oh, no. I said, okay, never mind. Never mind. So we left it. Well, a few years go by, and I thought, well, we tried. And it's a great location. Right? The building is old. It needs repairs, but it's a great location. And wouldn't you know it, years later, Shofar moves in, and I just out of curiosity, I asked around, how much did they pay? It's exactly what I offered. Back then, I was like, oh, that's a bicky scallop right there. But I'm chalking it up to the will of God. The Lord wants us somewhere else, and we have a much better deal here. We have paid, I want to say, we haven't even reached that offer yet. With all the building we've done and the land, et cetera, et cetera. God's been very good to us. But yeah, we tried to buy other places, and for us, it worked much better to build. I think if you have the choice to buy or build, I think it's better to build. That way you get exactly what you want. right? If you buy something else, you're going to have to probably renovate, and you're inheriting problems. We have a little bit of that because we have an older building that we have renovated, so we know a bit of what that means. Some of the upsides to buying or building: you're not wasting money on rent. You have the freedom of schedule and the use of all the amenities. You don't have to ask permission to use various things. And the public views it with some permanency. So it's just the opposite of what we talked about earlier. A little bit of the downside would be debt. You do need to be careful about going into debt. Praise God. The Lord has been so good to us. We have no debt. None at all. Praise the Lord. And I am not condemning any church that takes a loan or gets a bond. Sometimes that's necessary, so I'm not against it. But if it can be avoided, let's avoid it. God was so good to us. And I commend you as a church. You guys are very generous, and you give very, very well. But I'll also give the proper shout out here. Honor to whom honor is due. You might remember my last furlough, I did raise some money and asked some American churches to help, and they really kicked in a big way. They didn't even get up to 50%. Right? We did the heavy lifting, if I can say it like that. But they certainly did help us out. So I'm very happy to get to help other churches now, like we do in our missions conference, because God's been good to us like that. So be mindful of the debt, especially the initial expenses, but then don't forget the ongoing expenses. When I built the first church building in Malawi, I had no idea what I was doing. The Malawians have no money, right? They have no money. They're very poor. So I built a building that I thought would accommodate the eventual growth. Ashbad's church has grown. And thank God he has a big building. He uses it very wisely. But he has a lot of special meetings and stuff. But I built that way too big for them. And I told Ashbad, I said, man, I'm so sorry. If you need help maintaining this, do your best to do it yourself, but I overshot the mark. So if I need to pitch in and help out with some of the maintenance, I understand. Now, I think one time in the 13 years I've been here, has he asked for a little bit of help. His members actually do all the maintenance, which I'm very impressed with. But I learned something after that. They don't need some magnificent structure. They need something that they can manage. So when you build a building, make sure that it's something your people can pay for, not something that you need to get outside help to keep the lights on, right? And I've been very careful. These other Malawian pastors, they start a church in a village or something. Brother Mike, can you please send some money? We want to build a building. Say, okay, but who's going to pay for the tin sheets when they get blown off by the wind? And who's going to pay when the wall falls down, from the rain and stuff? Oh, well, we're just going to write you again. No, you need to think of how you are going to maintenance this. So build a building that you can maintain. And I think that's a very, very wise thing to consider. All right, and then some general considerations on the meeting place. This applies to any of these three, okay? Safety. You got to think about safety. Great that somebody offers you a place, but are you going to be safe while you're meeting inside? Is something going to be stolen outside? We were in one school block in Malawi. We're having church, and somebody parked his bicycle right outside the schoolroom. And sure enough, thief walks up, hops on the bike, takes off. Well, once that happens 4 or 5 times, you got to move. You got to move the church. There's just thieves circling around that place. You got to be mindful of that. You need to think about parking. Now, again, in Malawi, that was not a big deal because nobody owned a car. That made that easy. But here, you need to think about that. Again, you may not know this, but we thought about moving to Snowflake at one point. After the Roots, before we went to Bailey Park Primary School, we went over to Snowflake and asked them. At the time, the owners of that place were in our church at that time. He said, Pastor, come take a look. And they had a very nice the upper level there was a wide open space. It was, plenty big for what we needed. But, number one, the elderly people would not be able to walk those stairs. There's just no way that would work. And there's no elevator in that building. And number two, and the big thing, was the parking/safety. That area, the few times I've gone there for like a coffee, I'm nervous about my car outside. And the parking there is just not a good situation. So that was enough for me to pass on that. And then also accessibility. is this location easy to get to for anybody that you want to invite? Now, you can't accommodate everybody, right? No location is perfect for everybody, but try to be at least mindful of the accessibility issue. The first church we started in Malawi, we're in Lilongwe, the capital city. It's a large, large city. I didn't know how big until I lived there a few years. It is huge. I got there, I started at step one right here. Evangelize. Tracks, went to a school, and here, my 26-year-old brain, I thought I had it figured out. I'm going to choose a location right in the middle of town. The middle. I went to a school block in the middle of town. May I please rent a room? And they were looking at me like, for what? I said, for a church. You want to start a church? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Churches are in school blocks all over Malawi, but not that one. And now I know why. It's in the middle of town. Nobody lives in the middle of town. No one. That's where all the businesses are. Nobody lives at their business. They live on the outskirts of town. Every single member we had, it was either a 2.5-hour bicycle ride or a 45-minute taxi ride from every area where they lived. This was the stupidest place to get. But for the first 3 months, I thought I had it all figured out. And I thought, why aren't people, coming more regular? This is so simple. It's in the middle of town. It's fair and equal for everybody. Even myself, I had to drive 35 minutes to get to this place. So it didn't take long. I realized, okay, I see the problem now. Like I said, 3 months, I think. And I said, okay, let's split this up. We had about 40 people already making that drive every week, or that travel. Let's say traveling that far. So I said, okay, let's start 4 churches, because they were coming from 4 different directions. I said, we'll start a church in each corner. So we did. Here's my 26-year-old brain going, I got it figured out. So I would preach at 2, sometimes 3 churches every Sunday. And then other men that I was discipling, I would help them, put a sermon together. They didn't know what they were doing. But I would say, just say this, just say this. Whoa, what a disaster. For the next 2 months, we operated 4 churches. But then I realized this is a disaster. We've got to stop this. I said, okay, everybody, I'm so sorry. I'm closing 3 churches. Whew. When I wrote that in the prayer letter, sending it back to America, it sounded so good in the beginning. We've started 4 churches. We're closing 3 now. That was so humbling, so humbling. I met a missionary in Lilongwe. He'd been there for about 10 years. He was an older gent at that time, in his mid to late 60s. And I'd never heard of him up until then, but we greeted each other. He lived 5 hours south of me in Blantyre. And he said, oh, you're just starting off. How many churches you got? I said, well, we had 4, but now we only have 1. Now, kind of humbling moment. I said, how many do you have? 268. Okay. I didn't want to ask any. I found out later on how he started all those, but in any event, that's a different story. So we closed the 4. Let's say consolidated the 4 into 1, and we moved it to the one area where most of the members had originally come from. That became what now I call our first church. Right? So the church in what's known as Area 25, that's the church that Ashbad now pastors, and on and went from there. But the accessibility issue, that was an issue. So that church in Area 25, we had people coming an hour and a half in minibus taxis, because they'd have to take 2 or 3 to get to that church. Well, as soon as that church grew, as a man became ready, and this I learned through experience, wait for the man to be ready. Don't go start a church until there's a man ready to pastor it. So once the man was ready, then we'd take a core group out from the original church. They were traveling far. We'd go to their area. We already have the core members. And then we just go to that new area and start this process again. And then it would just grow from there. And that's how all of our churches have managed there. All right, now we're going to come to this part, how to conduct a service. This, I do not think, is in your notes. Am I right? Okay, so this is also a new section I'm adding in. Yeah. I wish somebody would have told me these things. I don't remember learning this in Bible school. I've checked my notes. I don't have any notes on this, so this is just stuff I've learned. Yes, sorry. Okay. Did I put it there? Page 4. Under? Oh, is it there? What did I put it there for? That doesn't make sense. Well, that's why it's here on my notes like that. Yeah. Guys, I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm trying to redo this, so I guess I did is that a better job or a worse job than I thought? I don't know. But anyway, okay, it's written there. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. All right, that little blunder aside, here's some new things. Consider the hospitality. Hospitality. We think as you start a church, what I thought about is what I'm going to teach and what I'm going to preach. Right? I don't think about people walking up to the door and getting from the door to their seat. I don't think about that moment. You know why? I'm up here. I don't care how you get to your seat. But the guy who's a visitor, who's never been, he does care about that moment a lot. It's very tough to walk into a brand new place and you're scared. Is everybody going to turn around and look at me? What if it's too packed? How am I going to find the bathroom? I mean, there's lots of things to consider. You need to think through that. Even if there is a parking issue, there are some people that will pull into a church parking lot, car park, and they just don't know where to stop, so they just circle on around and keep going. And they never go to that church because they just can't figure it out. Those are things you need to consider but as you're getting the church started. Now, if you're in a house, it's a little easier. If you're renting a place, you just got to work the lay of the land and see what's possible, but you need to think of those type of moments. Having a few ushers, having a greeter or two, and just telling them what's expected of that. Having a couple of people dedicated to, can we call it the hospitality ministry? It really does help. It takes some pressure off of you as the pastor that way you're not running around handling that when you should be concentrating on what you're about to preach. Right, here's another part, the announcements. Now, I know this might sound strange. That is the hardest part of every service for me. It is. Garrett, would you agree with that? It's up there, right? It depends on what I'm preaching, I guess, but I don't take any time to study my announcements. Who does? Right? I get up, I just want to remind you of some things. If I'm the church member, I do not need any fancy announcement time. I don't. Dr. Ruckman used to do this for announcements. He'd get up there and say, all right, now this week, what do we got here? What do we got? All right, well, got this group, they're meeting on Tuesday, 6 o'clock. Yeah, all right, be there for that. Somebody needs a car. So who needs a car? All right, pray for that guy. All right, needs a job. All right, everybody needs a job, man. Come on, everybody needs a job. That's not... All right, this is good. Somebody gave me this week. All right, let me read you this. Then he'd read it, and he'd go, all right, now that's... And he'd throw it down. Doesn't bother me at all. I don't care. It's just an announcement. It's all right, any visitors here today? Raise their hand. Okay. It would actually do you well. I have it now on my device. Every week, it pulls up. There's my announcements. All right, so I go through. I have a set thing that and as soon as I think about announcing something, I plug it in throughout the week. Otherwise, I get to Sunday. Some of you know, I used to do this a lot. Every now and then I will still. Am I forgetting something? Because sometimes people do this, and it's not a bad thing. It's just life. People come 2 minutes before the service. Pastor, can you announce this today? And I get it. That's just life. I don't mind that. But when you have 4 or 5 of those right before the service, and I don't have time to write it down, yeah, I'm going to ask, did I forget something today? But the announcements can get very clunky and can become that awkward moment that you're trying to avoid in church, and you lose some momentum. The singing's good, and here we are. It's time getting ready for the sermon, and you're up here fumbling and bumbling and trying to figure out, what time is this? And so actually take a little bit of time, think that through, and consider what you want to say before you say it. All right, so the announcements, let me get back to where I want to be on this. Not that side. All right, and then the next thing, teaching and preaching. One more thing on announcements. Keep it short, if at all possible. Be clear, concise, say what you need to say, don't linger. I've made the mistake, and I got a good friend in the ministry. I love him. But his announcements, he'll take 30 minutes. And he has not even as many announcements as we have, like things to announce. But he preaches the announcements. I mean, even like turn to the verse. Bro, no, man. Keep it short. All right, so I'm going to leave that there. But in case he watches this, I love you, brother. But you got to stop that, man. All right, look at Acts chapter 20. Acts 20. In verse 27 and 28, preaching and teaching topics. And the easy answer to this is pray. Ask the Lord what to talk about. I mean, that is the answer to this. But there's a human element to this. All right? You're allowed to go to the Lord and say, Lord, I see this as a need, or I've been getting this question a lot. So it's fine to factor in what's going on in the community, in your church. That's perfectly fine. As a shepherd of sheep, you would look at what the sheep are challenged with and try to feed them and take care of them accordingly. But then God always gets the final say on that. So you need to have your ear pressed up against the heart of God for that. But Acts 20 and verse 27, Paul says, "For I have not shunned to declare unto you all the counsel of God." Paul was determined to tell them everything God wanted them to know. Now this is very important to point out, because I find way too many times a pastor will get stuck on what he's comfortable with. He likes a certain topic. We call it a hobby horse. And he rides that horse all the way to the rapture. Give that horse a rest. There's more in the Bible than just that one thing. Now, everybody has their own hobby horse. For some guys, every Sunday it's the same thing. You need to get saved. You need to get saved. You need to get saved. Are you sure you're saved? You need to get saved. It's just evangelism. I love evangelism, but when you're preaching to a church filled with saved people, it's time to feed the sheep and not convert the goats. There's no goats left. You've converted them. So now feed them something different, which gets into verse 28. "Take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God." All right. Feeding, I don't want to get caught up in this because I think it's a wonderful metaphor. A few years back, I took up cooking as a hobby, as a leisure type thing. And I just don't have time, but I love to cook. There are so many things you can learn about preaching from cooking, from putting food together and how you prepare it and how you present it. I mean, all the way down to how you write an outline. That's how you plate the food. There's so many things that overlap there. But eating the same thing every meal, every time, that can get a bit exhausting. Right? So try to give your people a well-balanced diet. Be diligent, be vigilant, see what the people need, listen to their heart. You can often tell by when people are coming for counseling and stuff like that, you can recognize there are certain needs within the church. Don't stand up and preach about that person. Never do that. But you'll understand the heart of your people when they're suffering in the church, when they're struggling with big decisions. Then address that in a general sense. Never get specific to that person, but in a general sense, you can talk about those things. All right, so preaching and teaching topics, that's something we'll talk more about in homiletics class, but preaching verse by verse through the Bible, like we are with the Gospel of Luke, or what Garrett's doing with Job, and we've done this with other books, that's a fantastic way to fit in all the counsel of God. But don't limit yourself to that. Don't limit it to that. I know there's a very popular section of Christianity that thinks what they call expository preaching. That's the only way to preach. You just have to go verse by verse. I don't mind that. That is good. But which preacher in the Bible did that? Which sermon of Jesus's is an expository sermon, where he said, turn to this. And now Jesus did on occasion read a verse and then say something, but that's about it. That's a textual sermon at most. So the idea of preaching biographically and textually and topically, that's all on the table. Many of the Old Testament prophets, God would say, look at that basket of summer fruit. And he'd say, okay, I'm looking. He said, now go preach about it. And then God would give him a few things to say, and that was the meat of the sermon. And Jesus did this too. A sower went forth to sow. That was the sermon. So sermons can come in all shapes and sizes. All right, 1 Corinthians 14. Let's come to that. 1 Corinthians 14. Verse 24. We're going to talk about altar calls. Knowing how to shut a sermon down or how to close a service. Again, something you don't think about a lot, because you're focused on what you're going to say in your sermon. But now, what are you going to say when you're done with your sermon? I mean, think about it. I get to the end of class, and I say, okay, all right, we're done. Bye. It's very awkward, right? You're like, that's it? Do we sing a song? Do we shake hands? Do we not bow? I mean, what do we do? You need to have some sort of exit plan. Let lights come down the aisle. Everybody just follow the light, something. Now, I like the idea of an altar call. I know there is debate. People say the altar call started in the days of the First Great Awakening and Second Great Awakening, stuff like that. I get it. Altar call. Does everybody know what I mean by an altar call? You give an invitation at the end of the sermon. You're just giving people an opportunity to respond or to react. I grew up in a church that never had that. The Catholic Church, there is no invitation. There's nothing really to respond to anyway. But the idea of actually doing something, making a decision, was not there. In the days of the Great Awakenings, you had a lot of revival meetings, and I agree. They called it a mourner's bench. And they would have a bench, and people would come up and mourn or weep over their sins or whatever. Some people had a mourner's room. So if God has touched you, go to this room and pray, and somebody will come and counsel you. Many different ways you can handle that. When I say altar call, I don't want to limit it just to what we do, right? The way we do it. I think there's more than one right way to do this. I do think it is a biblical thing to do. I understand that some people abuse it. I understand that some people try to work up the crowd, and you can manipulate people to get them to the front so that it looks like God is doing something. And just because people come forward, that doesn't automatically mean the Holy Spirit's moving, right? I've had plenty of times where people come forward, I'm like, okay, that guy wasn't listening to any part of the sermon. He was in and out 5 times to the bathroom. He was checking his phone, and now he's down here praying. Buddy, you are not talking to God. There's just no way that's happening. Right? So altar calls can be tricky. But just because someone abuses it doesn't mean you throw it out. Right? There's still a right way to do this. I have had very meaningful moments, very precious moments down at the altar, and there is something biblical and something special about taking that step and moving, taking action to mark the moment. Right? You go throughout the Bible, there's times where people built an altar unto the Lord. Now, I know that's an actual altar. I know it's not exactly the same as what we're doing, but it's the same principle. You're marking the moment. So 1 Corinthians 14, verse 24, Paul says, "But if all prophesy, and there come in one that believeth not, or one unlearned, he is convinced of all, he is judged of all." So here's this new guy in the church. Just by looking around at how the other people are responding to the church service, he gets under conviction. Now, what has he seen? He has to be seeing something. He has to be hearing something. If he's going to be judged and convinced of all, not by everybody just sitting there, arms folded, nodding off. He's not convinced by that. The church is doing something. Now, the sermon plays a part of this, but look at the next part. Verse 25, "And thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest, and so, falling down on his face, he will worship God and report that God is in you of a truth." He falls on his face before God. Now, this isn't slain in the spirit. right? He's in control of himself, but he's under such heavy conviction that he's going to do business with God. Now, just play this through in your mind. How did that look? Where did he do that? But there's only so many options, right? You're in the building. There's a man up there preaching. He is sitting out there somewhere. Now, either right there at his seat, he went down into that prostrated position, right? Or he came forward. Or he went to just some dedicated spot to do that. But it happened. It was there in the early church. There was a response to the service, whatever part it was, the singing, the preaching, whatever. But to say that altar calls are unbiblical or because they're abused, we shouldn't do them, I can't see any other way to explain what you're reading there other than there is a response to the sermon. So as you have a church and you're having your service, just consider that part of it. Not every service is going to be the same. You'll recognize when the Holy Spirit's moving you towards that. Some sermons are not built for immediate response. Every now and again you'll hear us do this. All right, let's all stand, heads bowed, eyes closed. We're just going to pray and dismiss. Okay, that's it. Then other services, you don't expect to do it. Man, God just got to moving. All right, let's take a minute and pray about this. So just have a plan and let God direct you there. And then lastly, special events, just to finish up on this. Some things to consider when having a service. Special events need a great deal of planning. Your Sunday morning, your normal, regular schedule, you kind of know what to expect, right? Even myself, the announcements, these things take care of themselves now. You all know when the offering's going to happen, right? You kind of know how class is going to shut down tonight. We fall into a groove. But when you have a special service, it's as if we're back to having our very first church service. And nobody really knows exactly what to expect. So the missions conference that we just had, I wrote out every detail of every service. I think it was about 2 weeks ahead of time. I chose all the songs. I chose the announcements, which missionary I'm going to present and what I'm going to talk about. I wrote it down to the sermon's going to happen here. I'm going to come up afterwards, and I didn't know what I was going to say, but I'm going to say something. And this way, I can show it to whoever I'm talking to. The pianist wants to know, when do I need to be at the piano? Here, here, here. And then Rainier, or whoever's at the table in the back with the AV stuff, what slide do I need to put up? Here, here, here. And I have a plan for that. So because it's a unique and I would say a once-off, it's not a regular thing, you want to think that through in advance. And that way all the people that are involved can also fall in line with that. Okay, that's as far as we'll get tonight. I appreciate you giving me 2 hours to talk about local church tonight. Any questions on any of this? Yes, sir.
Standing, sitting in church, I know where I grew up, sometimes we sit in the sand, sometimes we stand.
Yep.
Even praying, standing and praying was quite different for me. And even reading Bible, I've been in some churches.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure what our opinion.
That's a very good question. The way that we operate our church service is not the only way to do it. There's some other churches that I visit in the States. They have a very different approach, and I enjoy it while I'm there. I probably will never do it here. But some churches, for the reading of the Scripture, they have the entire congregation stand, open the Bible, and they'll usually say something like, let's all stand to honor the reading of the Word of God. And then you read your text, you pray, and then you can be seated and the sermon starts. They get that from Nehemiah chapter 8. There's the precedent for it. It's not a New Testament command, but perfectly fine to do it. Another little wrinkle that sometimes happens, Brother Joel did it once, I think. Maybe it was Dobbins, but somebody did it during the conference where they will read and then they'll say, can so-and-so pray? And they'll ask somebody else to pray to start. I'm perfectly fine with those kind of wrinkles. That's where the pastor I would actually recommend trying a few different things and seeing what works. The whole meet and greet thing that we have, I love that time. But we actually tried a few different ideas, and then I want to say evolved, but it turned into that meet and greet time. So I'm perfectly happy to try some of this extra stuff and see what might work well with the church. Every now and again, I haven't done it, I don't know, 3 years So Rainier, it might be your fault that we try this soon, but we'll sing a chorus where we sing and clap and dance and sing. Yeah. Because some of you are worried. I get to missing that every now and again. I will sing Chichewa, Malawian choruses, like in my house sometimes because I miss them. They're great songs. So yeah, I think it's good. It's healthy to try that stuff. Yeah. Right. Anything else? All good. All right. Bye. No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry I had to do it. Where's the clipboard? Was that awkward enough? I saw some of you starting to turn red here. That's funny. All right. I think, Chotso, did you pray last time? It was Garrett, right? All right. Chotso, if you can dismiss us in prayer, please.